The chamber was massive. It stretched so wide that the far walls disappeared into shadow, and the ceiling was so high that clouds sometimes formed near the top. 600 civilizations had built this place together, stone by stone and beam by beam, over thousands of years. They called it the Hall of Voices, and it sat at the center of the Galactic Concord, the greatest political body in the known universe. Today it was full of laughter. The laughter came from everywhere at once. When it bounced off the curved walls and rolled across the tiered seating, where delegates from 412 recognized species sat watching the small group of humans standing alone in the center of the floor. The humans were dressed simply. Dark uniforms, no medals, no decorations. There were 5 of them, and the one standing at the front was a woman named Serena Voss. She was not tall. She was not armed. She carried nothing except a flat rectangular object wrapped in gray cloth, so tucked under her left arm. The laughter had started the moment she introduced herself. It was not unkind laughter at first. It was the laughter of a galaxy that had been waiting for centuries for humans to finally show up. Humans had been detected long ago, a small species on a small world in a quiet arm of the Milky Way. Probes had been sent. Signals had been broadcast. There had been no answer for 600 years. Most civilizations had assumed humans were either dead or too primitive to notice. Then, without warning, a human ship appeared at the border of conquered space, transmitted the correct docking codes, and requested a seat at the assembly. Everyone wanted to see what kind of species spent 600 years ignoring the galaxy and then walked in like they belonged there. What they had not expected was the object Serena Voss unwrapped and placed flat on the speaking podium. It was a plaque. It's on an old and scratched, made of a dark metal that nobody recognized. It was about the size of a large book. The words on it were engraved deeply, cut into the metal by hand. The same message was written 47 times in 47 different languages. Most of the delegates could read at least one version. The message said, "There is something sleeping at the edge of the Vela expanse. We have seen it before. Do not wake it." That was all. Serena Voss stepped back from the podium. She folded her hands in front of her and waited. For a moment the hall was quiet. Then somewhere in the upper tiers someone made a sound. A low, bubbling noise that served as laughter for the Karathi collective. Then someone else joined in. Then someone else. Within 30 seconds, the entire chamber was noise. High Chancellor Vreth of the Veth Dominion leaned back in his tall chair and showed his front teeth. His species showed teeth when they were amused. He was very amused. When the Veth were the most powerful empire in the known galaxy, they had 17,000 warships, 30 occupied star systems, and a history stretching back 2 million years. He looked down at the small human woman standing alone on the floor and shook his head slowly. "Is this what the humans came to give us?" he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "A plaque? A warning about a sleeping thing?" He showed his teeth again. "We accept your gift. We will put it in a corner somewhere." More laughter. A delegate from the Inari seats, ancient, slow-moving beings who were considered the wisest species in the Concord, turned to their neighbor and said quietly that they felt sorry for the humans. It was embarrassing, they said, to come so far and offer so little. The humans clearly had no understanding of how the galaxy worked. They should have brought trade agreements, military data, resource surveys, not a scratched piece of metal with 3 sentences on it. Serena Voss said nothing during all of this. She stood and listened and waited for the noise to stop. When it finally did, she spoke only once more. "The warning stands," she said, "whatever you choose to do with it." Then she picked up the plaque, wrapped it back in the gray cloth, and walked out. The other 4 humans followed her in silence. The chamber buzzed with conversation after they left. Most delegates agreed that humanity was either very strange or very stupid, and that the two were probably the same thing. The plaque was eventually handed to a junior staff member and placed against the wall near the back of a storage corridor, where it sat with other uncatalogued items nobody wanted to deal with. Only one person in the hall moved differently after the humans left. His name was Quelven. He was a Shrathi, a tall, thin insectoid being with 4 arms and pale compound eyes that never fully closed. He served as an archivist for the Concord's Historical Records Division, which meant he spent most of his time in quiet rooms with very old documents. He was not a politician. He had no army and no territory, and no influence worth speaking of. Nobody noticed when he stood up, excused himself from his small seat near the back of the gallery, and walked down to the corridor where the plaque had been taken. Because he stood in front of it for a long time. The surface was worn smooth in some places, as if many hands had touched it over many years. The engraving was deep and careful. Someone had taken time with this. Someone had wanted the words to last. 47 languages. Quelven could read 11 of them, and every version said exactly the same thing. There was no variation, no flourish, no attempt to make the message dramatic, just the facts, as whoever wrote it understood them. He took out a small personal device and photographed the plaque from 6 different angles. Then he stood back and looked at it one more time. The Vela expanse was 11,000 light-years away. It was a stretch of deep space that most navigation charts marked as uninteresting. Low star density, no known habitable worlds, rarely traveled. No civilizations had laid claim to it, because there was nothing there worth claiming. Or so everyone had believed. The previous week, before the human delegation even arrived, news had come through the Concord's relay network that the Veth Dominion's deep-range exploration fleet had located something in the Vela expanse, a structure. The early reports described it as enormous and perfectly geometric and completely silent. High Chancellor Vreth had already announced plans to send a formal survey team to document and claim it. Quelven stared at the plaque. There is something sleeping at the edge of the Vela expanse. He photographed it one more time, tucked his device away, and walked back toward the archive wing at a pace slightly faster than usual. Behind him, the plaque sat against the corridor wall in the half-dark. Nobody else stopped to read it. The planet Nemus did not look like much from orbit. It was gray-brown and cold, tucked in the outer band of a quiet star system, far from any major trade route. No rings. No moons worth naming. The surface was flat and featureless from a distance. No forests, no oceans, no lights from cities. If a navigator passed through the system without knowing what to look for, they would mark it as dead and move on. But Quelven was not a navigator, and he knew exactly what to look for. He had spent 3 weeks reading everything the Concord's archives held about humanity. There was not much. A handful of old probe reports from the original detection surveys, some basic biological and social data. A note saying that humanity had been formally classified as a pre-contact species 612 years ago, pending first response, which had never come. Then suddenly a docking request, a plaque, 3 sentences, and then the humans walking out of the Hall of Voices as though they had said everything they needed to say. What the Concord's archives did not contain was any record of what humanity had been doing for the past 6 centuries. No trade data, no military records, no exploration maps, nothing. A species that left no records was a species that had chosen not to leave records. That thought had stayed with Quelven during the entire journey to Mnemis. He had sent a message ahead. Ambassador Serena Voss had replied in under an hour. The reply said one word: come. The landing pad was underground. His ship was guided in through a wide shaft that descended straight down into the rock, lit on all sides by long strips of pale light. The walls were smooth and dark and covered in a faint texture that took him a moment to identify. It was writing. Text carved directly into the stone, running in long horizontal lines from the top of the shaft all the way to the bottom, uninterrupted. He did not have time to read any of it before the ship touched down. Serena Voss was waiting for him at the edge of the pad. She was alone. She looked exactly as she had in the Hall of Voices. Calm, plainly dressed and giving nothing away in her face. You came faster than I expected, she said. The Veth survey fleet departed 4 days ago, Quelven said, heading for the Vela expanse. I know, she turned and walked toward a corridor. Follow me. Nemus was entirely underground. What looked like a dead rock from space was, beneath the surface, one of the largest information storage facilities Quelven had ever seen. The corridors went on for kilometers. At every wall was covered in some form of record. Carved text, metal plates, sealed data containers, shelves of physical objects behind glass panels. Temperature was carefully controlled. Humidity sensors were mounted at regular intervals. The air smelled faintly of something old and dry and metallic. There were people everywhere, moving quietly, working alone or in small groups, speaking in low voices. Nobody looked up as Voss and Quelven passed. "How many people live here?" he asked. "In about 40,000, she said. "Archivists, researchers, support staff. Different rotation every 2 years. Some of them never leave." "What do they archive?" "Everything," she said simply. She led him through a series of locked doors, each requiring a different form of identification, until they reached a section of the archive set apart from the rest by a single, very plain door with no markings on it at all. She opened it with a small key worn on a chain around her wrist. In the room beyond was not large. It was lit by a single overhead panel. In the center was a table with 2 chairs. On the table was a flat display screen in a physical folder. Actual paper, bound in dark material, sitting closed beside it. Voss sat down. Quelven sat across from her. "What I'm going to show you doesn't leave this room in any format you control," she said. "You can read it, hear it, ask questions. That's all." "Agreed," said Quelven. She opened the folder. What it contained was a formal record, dry and precise, of events that had taken place 900 years ago. Quelven began reading. His compound eyes moved quickly across the pages. The first thing the record made clear was that humanity had reached space long before the Concord had detected them. Not decades early, centuries. While the Concord was still filing away its first probe reports about the small blue world in the quiet galactic arm, humanity had already built its first faster-than-light ships and was quietly moving through space. They had no interest in being found. Not yet. They moved carefully, mapped what they could, and kept their presence small. They watched other civilizations from a distance and learned everything they could without making contact. During this early period of quiet exploration, they found the Vela Expanse. The first human ships to enter the region reported nothing unusual. The second wave reported strange instrument readings, small, repeating anomalies, suggesting something very large and very deep in the expanse was producing a faint signal. The third wave went to investigate. They found the structure. The record described it in careful technical language. 14 times the mass of Jupiter. Perfectly geometric. Cold to every sensor. Silent. The survey team sent a probe inside and lost contact with it immediately. They sent another. Same result. And they noted the structure as a priority investigation target and sent for more ships. More ships came. Then more. Over the following 11 years, humanity sent expedition after expedition into the Vela Expanse. They cut into the structure's outer shell. They mapped its interior passages. They went deeper. Then on the third day of the 7th major expedition, someone did something the record listed only as an unauthorized activation attempt. Whatever it was, it worked. The structure woke up. The pages that followed were the hardest to read. Quelven turned them slowly. 17 ships destroyed in the first 6 hours. 3 human colonies within range of the Vela Expanse went silent. The entity that emerged, referred to in the record only as the Sleeper, did not use weapons in any form humanity recognized. It simply unmade things. Ships, installations, anything within reach ceased to be what it was. 400 million people died before humanity understood enough about the Sleeper's behavior to begin fighting back in any coordinated way. It took 61 years. The record documented all of it. Every strategy tried, every failure, every small piece of understanding earned at terrible cost. And finally, the method that worked. Not destruction, not a weapon, a sequence. A precise arrangement of resonance pulses at exact intervals and exact positions that somehow replicated the conditions under which the Sleeper had originally gone dormant. It went back to sleep, and humanity went very, very quiet after that. Quelven set the last page down. The room was completely still. "Why did no one know any of this?" he asked. "Because we chose not to tell anyone," Voss said. "We needed to understand the galaxy first. Who could be trusted? Who would be reckless? Who would listen?" She looked at him steadily. "We spent 600 years watching before we showed up with that plaque." Quelven was quiet for a moment. "Why did you not stop the Veth directly? Use your fleet, your knowledge. Stop the survey mission before it reached the Expanse?" Voss was quiet for a long moment. We tried, she said. She gestured at the plaque photograph on the display screen. That was the try. The Veth fleet was 14 ships strong. They were not the largest ships the Dominion owned, but they were among the best. Long-range survey vessels with military-grade shielding and weapon systems that could reduce a small moon to debris in under a minute. High Chancellor Vreth had sent his best commander, Adral Kos, a veteran of 3 border wars and 2 full annexation campaigns. The fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Vela Expanse and sat in silence for a moment. The structure was visible immediately. Even at 3 light minutes out, it filled a significant portion of the forward sensor display. Every instrument on every ship confirmed the same numbers. 14 times the mass of Jupiter, perfectly geometric, cold, silent. No energy output, no radiation, no signals of any kind. Adral Kos looked at the data for a long time and felt the specific satisfaction that comes from finding something new and knowing you arrived first. It's dead, his science officer said. Whatever built this is long gone. Log it, said Adral Kos. Begin the approach. The fleet moved in slowly. Standard survey protocol. 1 ship forward at point position, the rest holding back in a loose arc. The point ship, the Veth Resolve, closed the distance to the structure and fed data back to the fleet in real time. The outer surface was flat and dark, made of a material that matched nothing in the Dominion's database. No visible seams, no entry points, no markings. Just smooth geometry on a scale that made the Veth Resolve look like a speck of dust against a wall. Adral Kos ordered a cutting team. It took 4 hours to breach the outer shell. The material resisted every standard cutting tool and had to be worked through slowly with a sustained high-energy beam. When the opening finally appeared, about 3 meters wide, sensors reported only dark, empty passage on the other side. The boarding team went in. 6 soldiers and 2 scientists. Adral Kos watched their helmet feeds from the bridge. Inside, the passage was tall and wide and perfectly straight. The walls had the same smooth, dark quality as the exterior. The team walked forward for about 200 meters, taking readings, collecting small material samples, speaking in clipped professional voices. Nothing unusual. The air inside, and there was air, which surprised the scientists, was cold and old and tasted of nothing. And then one of the scientists said, "The readings are changing." The feeds went dark 12 seconds later. Not damaged, not cut. Dark, as though the feeds had never existed. Adral Kos tried to contact the boarding team. No response. He tried to contact the Veth Resolve. The ship answered normally, but the team's suits transmitted no signal at all, not even a carrier wave. They had not moved on any sensor. They had simply become undetectable. "Pull back," he said. "Get the Resolve away from the structure." The Veth Resolve began to move. It traveled about 400 meters before it stopped. The engines were running. The crew was trying to accelerate. The ship simply stopped, as though something had reached out and held it in place with a very large, very patient hand. Then, across the entire fleet, across every communication system, across every personal device and navigation computer, there was a signal. It was not a radio wave. It was not a subspace transmission. It went through every form of shielding as though the shielding was not there, and it did not register on any instrument at all. It appeared directly in the mind of every living being within range. It was not a voice. It was not a sound. It was more like a pressure, a very heavy, very old awareness pressing against the edges of conscious thought. It lasted approximately 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, most of the Veth crew experienced something they had no name for. A sense of vast scale, of time so long it had no meaning, of a presence that did not care about their ships or their weapons or the 600 civilizations that had sent them here with confidence. Something that looked at the entire known galaxy the way a person might glance at a small insect crawling across a table. 3 seconds. Then it was gone. And then the Veth Resolve began to come apart. Not explosively, not violently. Piece by piece, section by section, the ship's matter was reorganized. Panels separated from frames, frames separated from beams. The pieces drifted apart slowly and gracefully, and each piece continued to be taken apart into smaller pieces still. There were crew members on that ship. The sensors tracked them for a short while before they too became simply undetectable. The rest of the Veth fleet opened fire. Every weapon system fired at once. And the barrage was enormous, enough to crack a moon, and every shot hit the structure directly. There was no explosion. There was no damage marker. The energy was absorbed so completely that sensors could not confirm impact. The structure did not respond for approximately 40 seconds. Then it moved. It moved slowly, the way very large things move. With enormous, deliberate momentum, it turned, reorienting itself in space, and then it began to travel in a direction that every navigation system in the fleet immediately identified. Toward the galactic core, toward populated space. Adralkos transmitted an emergency distress signal to the Galactic Concorde. It was the first time in his career he had ever done so. His hands were steady. He had been trained not to panic. But when the response came back 12 minutes later, and he scanned the list of civilizations pledging assistance, he noticed that the one name he most wanted to see had sent only 2 words. Stand by. Not we are coming, not help is on the way. Just stand by. As though whatever happened next required waiting in a very specific and deliberate way. Back in the Hall of Voices, the signal from the Vela expanse had hit the chamber at the exact same moment. Every delegate experienced those 3 seconds simultaneously. Some species collapsed. Several had to be carried out. The Korathi collective made no noise at all, which was profoundly unusual for beings who communicated almost entirely through sound. The Inari elder statesmen simply sat still and stared at nothing. The human delegation sat still too. Their faces were pale, but none of them fell, and none of them made a sound, and when the 3 seconds ended, Serena Voss was already on her feet. She looked at her communication device. A message had arrived on a private channel so restricted that she checked the sender ID twice to be certain. It was from the personal account of High Chancellor Vreth. It contained no words, just a single character in galactic standard, the formal symbol that meant, in the oldest and most precise translation, I am listening. Voss read it once. Then she put the device in her pocket and told her team, tell the Admiral, it's time. The human fleet did not come from one place. It came from many, from quiet stations tucked in asteroid fields, from deep space depots marked as inactive on Concord navigation charts, from positions scattered across a wide stretch of space that nobody had known were occupied. The ships emerged one by one over 18 hours, each traveling to a pre-assigned coordinate. And when they were all assembled, the fleet stretched across a volume of space large enough to hold several solar systems inside it. There were 411 ships. They were not beautiful. They did not look like the clean, polished fleets of the Veth Dominion or the sleek geometric formations of the Inari Defense Forces. Human ships were old and layered, built in pieces over centuries, repaired and modified and reinforced so many times that very few still matched their original design. Some had extra hull plating welded on in wide strips. And some had equipment attached to their exteriors that no other species could identify by looking at it. All of them were scarred. All of them had seen something. They had been built for this, not for war in general, for this specific thing. The Galactic Concorde offered their fleets within 6 hours of the distress signal. 7 major powers pledged warships, a combined total of over 3,000 vessels, the largest assembled force in recorded Concorde history. Inner Ambassador Voss accepted the offer and stated one condition. She stated it once, plainly, without negotiation. Every ship follows our coordinates and our timing exactly. Nothing fires, nothing moves, nothing transmits without authorization from our command. The last time a species improvised against this entity without a full understanding of its behavior, they lost 400 million people. She paused. We will not do that again. There was a long silence on the combined channel. Then, one by one, all 7 fleet commanders confirmed their agreement. The human command ship was called the Mnemus Bell. It was not the largest ship in the fleet and not the most heavily armed, but it was the oldest. A vessel in continuous service for over 3 centuries, refitted and rebuilt and renamed several times. always kept running by people who understood that what it carried was more important than how it looked. What it carried was 900 years of human research into the sleeper. Every behavioral record, every failed strategy, every partial success, every observation made by people who had spent their entire careers trying to understand something that did not want to be understood. Admiral Harron Cole stood on the bridge. He was a quiet man, not young, with a face that had very few expressions. Oh, he had been selected for this command 11 years ago and had spent the time since doing nothing except preparing for this specific operation. He had read everything in the archive. He had run the simulations so many times that the numbers lived in him like a second set of memories. Quell Ven was on the bridge too. He had been given observer status. The humans had not invited him, but they had not refused him either. He stood near the edge of the room where he was out of the way and watched. "Are the 6 platforms," Cole said to his operations officer. "Status. All 6 in transit, arrival at assigned positions in 9 hours." Cole nodded. He looked at the main display. The sleeper's movement was being tracked across every relay in the network, its slow progress toward the galactic core, marked by a trail of dead communication channels and silent sensor buoys. At its current pace, it would reach the first populated systems in 11 days. Quell Ven approached the Admiral carefully, and he had been watching him work for 3 hours and had held his question back as long as he could. "Are you angry?" he asked. Cole looked at him. He did not seem surprised by the question. "At who?" "At the Veth, at the Conquered, at all of us. For not listening." Cole was quiet for a moment. He turned back to the display. On it, the sleeper's position marker moved a fraction. "We were angry once," he said. "A long time ago. Then we got busy." He said it simply, without weight. Ooh, the way a person states a fact that stopped needing explanation a very long time ago. Quell Ven did not ask anything else. The operation had a name. It had always had a name. Sitting in the human archive for centuries, fully planned and fully documented long before anyone else knew it would be needed. The name was Operation We Told You. Nobody on the human side found the name funny. It was not a joke. It was simply what they had always called it, because that was what it was. The 6 platforms were the key to everything. They were not weapons in any traditional sense. They were large, precisely built structures, each one different, each designed to perform a specific function at a specific moment. The function was resonance. The sleeper had gone dormant the first time under a very specific set of conditions. Conditions that human researchers had spent 900 years reverse engineering from incomplete data, failed attempts, and in the accounts of survivors who had lived long enough to report what they observed. The 6 platforms, positioned correctly and fired in the correct sequence at the correct intervals, would attempt to recreate those conditions. Attempt was the word Cole's team used internally. In official documents, the word was execute. Cole had insisted on that. His people needed to believe it would work, not because certainty made success more likely, but because doubt at the wrong moment could break timing, and timing was everything. The Concord fleet moved into position around the human formation. A vast organized shell of thousands of ships following coordinates prepared by a species they had dismissed 3 weeks ago as primitive and strange. No one said anything about that. Everyone was watching the display, watching the sleeper's slow movement, watching the countdown to platform arrival. On the 3rd day of transit, the sleeper paused. It had not paused before. For 60 hours, its movement had been constant and inevitable. Now it stopped completely. All sensors confirmed it, and sat still in space. Then it turned, not toward the galactic core, not in any direction that made tactical sense. It turned directly toward the human fleet. Every ship in the combined force felt it. That same pressure, lighter than before, more focused. As though whatever had sent out the crushing wave of awareness in the Vela expanse was now making deliberate contact. It lasted only 1 second. In that second, Admiral Cole experienced the sensation of being looked at by something very old. Not with hostility, not with recognition exactly. Something between the two. The feeling of a thing that had seen 10,000 civilizations rise and fall, looking at something familiar and thinking, "This one again." Cole blinked. Then he adjusted his weight on his feet. He checked the platform positions on the display. 9 minutes to final positions, his officer said. Copy, said Cole. All ships hold pattern. The 6 platforms arrived at their positions over the course of 4 minutes, sliding into place across a vast triangle of space with the sleeper at its center. Each platform ran its own internal sequence, charging, calibrating. The sleeper did not move. It sat in the center of the room. The lights flickered, and the air was thick with the scent of ozone. The sleeper's eyes were closed, and its breathing was shallow. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. The sleeper's body was still, and its skin was pale and cold. The sleeper's heart was beating slowly, and its pulse was weak. The sleeper's mind was blank, and its thoughts were scattered. The sleeper's body was still, and its skin was pale and cold. The sleeper's heart was beating slowly, and its pulse was weak. The sleeper's mind was blank, and its thoughts were scattered. The sleeper's body was still, and its skin was pale and cold. The sleeper's heart was beating slowly, and its pulse was weak. The sleeper's mind was blank, and its thoughts were scattered. The sleeper's body was still, and its skin was pale and cold. The sleeper's heart was beating slowly, and its pulse was weak. The sleeper's mind was blank, and its thoughts were scattered. The sleeper's body was still, and its skin was pale and cold. The sleeper's heart was beating slowly, and its pulse was weak. The sleeper's mind was blank, and its thoughts were scattered. The sleeper's body was still, and its skin was pale and cold. The sleeper's heart was beating slowly, and its pulse was weak. The sleeper's mind was blank, and its thoughts were scattered. The sleeper's body was still, and its skin was pale and cold. The sleeper's heart was beating slowly, and its pulse was weak. The sleeper's mind was blank, and its thoughts were scattered. The sleeper's body was still, and its skin was pale and cold. The sleeper's heart was beating slowly, and its pulse was weak. The sleeper's mind was blank, and its thoughts were scattered. The sleeper's body was still, and its skin was pale and cold. The sleeper's heart was beating slowly, and its pulse was weak. The sleeper's mind was blank, and its thoughts were scattered. The sleeper's body was still, and its skin was pale and cold. The sleeper's heart was beating slowly, and its pulse was weak. The sleeper's mind was blank, and its thoughts were scattered. The sleeper's body was still, and its skin was pale and cold. The sleeper's heart was beating slowly, and its pulse was weak. The sleeper's mind was blank, and its thought sleeper did not move. It sat in the center of the formation and waited, if a thing that had existed longer than most stars could be said to wait. The pressure it put on the minds of nearby beings had changed. Lower now, more steady, like a sound that had dropped to a frequency felt in the chest rather than heard with the ears. Aboard the Concorde vessels, medics moved through ships treating crew members for disorientation and distress. Aboard the human ships, people sat at their stations and did their jobs. Admiral Cole ran the final checks. Platform 1, ready. Platform 2, ready. Platform 3, ready. Platform 4, ready. Platform 5, ready. Platform 6, ready. Timing confirmed, his operations officer said. Sequence can begin on your mark. Cole looked at the display for one more moment. The sleeper was very still. The combined fleet surrounded it in a sphere of thousands of ships, all quiet, all waiting. 3,000 years of combined galactic military history gathered in one place, watching a human admiral decide when to begin. Mark, Cole said. Platform 1 fired. It produced no visible beam, no flash of light. What it produced was a pulse, a resonance wave moving outward at a specific frequency, shaped and directed toward the sleeper's outer shell. When the instruments recorded contact, nothing visible happened. 31 seconds later, Platform 2 fired, then Platform 3 after another interval, then 4, then 5. The gaps between each pulse were not equal. They followed a pattern calculated from the behavior data of the original event, a rhythm that was not mechanical or musical, but something harder to name, closer to the timing of a living process. Why, as though whoever had originally built the sleeper had used something biological as a template for its dormancy cycle. Between the third and fourth pulse, the sleeper moved, not toward the fleet, it moved inward. a slow contraction, as though something at its core was pulling its outer mass toward its center. Sensors reported a decrease in its energy output, then an increase, then a rapid fluctuation that lasted about 8 seconds and caused every sensitive instrument in the fleet to return unreadable data. During those 8 seconds, 3 human ships at the nearest edge of the formation were hit. Not by a directed attack. The sleeper did not attack. What happened was more like a side effect. A wave of restructuring energy with no specific target that struck the nearest ships simply because they were there. The cadence, the long watch, and a support vessel called Arlen's Bridge were partially unmade in the same way the Veth Resolve had been unmade, though not completely. Pieces of them were gone. Their remaining sections drifted. The crews of all 3 vessels had known the risk. Before the operation began, every crew member on every human ship near the platform positions had been given the option to transfer out. None of them had transferred. Platform 6 fired, and the final pulse was longer than the others. Not a single wave, but a sustained tone held at a precise frequency for 40 seconds. On every instrument in the fleet, the sleeper's energy readings climbed sharply during the first 20 seconds, peaked at a level that made several Concord science officers transmit urgent warnings about the risk of a full discharge, and then dropped. Steadily, measurably, completely. When the pressure on the minds of every being within range decreased in a way that was almost physical, like a weight being lifted from behind the eyes. Ships running with emergency lighting shifted back to normal. Crew members who had been gripping their seats loosened their hands. The sleeper's movement stopped. All movement stopped. Its energy output fell below detectable levels. Then it was silent again. Not the silence of something pausing. Not the silence of something gathering itself for another action. The silence of something that was no longer there, in any way that mattered. Present only as mass, as geometry, as a cold structure in empty space. 11 minutes and 43 seconds from the first pulse to the last. Cole let out a long, slow breath. He did not cheer. None of the human bridge crew cheered. They ran confirmation checks, cycling through every instrument, verifying every reading, making sure the data was consistent across all platforms before anything was announced. This process took 20 minutes. Then Cole's communications officer said, "All Concord channels are open, Admiral." "Tell them," Cole said. The confirmation went out across the network. In the Galactic Concord Hall of Voices, where a full emergency session had been running continuously for 11 days, the message arrived in the middle of a frightened debate about evacuation routes for core worlds. The delegate who received it read it twice, then stood up without asking for the floor and said loudly and clearly that it was over. The hall was quiet for a moment. Then a sound rose. Not organized, not a cheer exactly, but a release, all at once, from 412 species who had been holding something very tight for 11 days and could finally let it go. On the Nemesis bell, Quelvin stood near the back of the bridge and watched Cole shake hands with his operations team. And he was trying to find words for what he had just witnessed and coming up short. Not because nothing had happened. Everything had happened. But because the thing he kept returning to was not the operation or the platforms or the 11 minutes. It was the moment 3 weeks ago when Serena Voss had walked into the Hall of Voices and placed a scratched titanium plaque on a podium and waited patiently while 412 civilizations laughed at her. She had known then. Oh, they had all known. Every part of what had just happened had been anticipated, prepared for, filed, planned, named. They had watched the galaxy find the structure the same way a person watches someone walk toward a door they've been warned about, with sadness and with readiness. The Galactic Concord convened its formal session 2 weeks later. The Hall of Voices was full, every seat occupied, every delegation present. When the human delegation walked in, the chamber was already quiet. It stayed quiet. High Chancellor Vreth, who had never in his documented political career stood voluntarily to acknowledge another species, rose from his seat when Serena Voss entered the room. He did not speak. He simply stood and remained standing until she reached the center podium. She set something on the podium. Another plaque. New, clean, the same dark metal as the first, the same depth of engraving, the same 47 languages. There are two more entities like this one, she said, in different locations, different behavioral profiles, different risk levels, different methods required to address them if they wake. She looked around the chamber. We have complete files on both. She paused. We believe you have earned access to those files. We would like to share them. No one laughed. 3 years after the Vela incident, Kelvin published a historical account that ran to 900 pages and was translated into 216 languages within its first year. It documented everything: the plaque, the Hall of Voices, Mnemes, the archive, the fleet, the 11 minutes. It was considered the most important historical work of the generation. The last line read, "Humanity did not resent the laughter. They had planned for it." What surprised them most was how quickly, in the years that followed, when the rest of the galaxy learned to be quiet and listen. The original plaque was removed from the storage corridor where it had sat against a wall in the half-dark. It was cleaned, mounted, and installed above the main entrance to the Hall of Voices, under a single dedicated light. Every delegate from every species had to pass beneath it to enter the chamber. Nobody had to be told not to laugh at it. They already knew. The planet Nemes did not look like anything special from space. It was gray and cold, sitting alone in a quiet star system far from any busy trade route. No rings around it, no oceans, no forests, no city lights visible from orbit. If a pilot passed through that system without knowing what to look for, they would check the planet off as dead and keep flying. But Quelven was not a pilot. He knew exactly what he was looking for. He had spent 3 weeks reading everything the Galactic Concord's archives held about humanity. There was not much. A few old probe reports from the first detection surveys, centuries ago, some basic notes on human biology, a short record saying humanity had been classified as a pre-contact species 612 years ago, and that first contact attempts had received no response. Then silence. Then suddenly a human ship appearing at the Concord border with the correct docking codes, requesting a seat in the assembly. Then a plaque. 3 sentences. And 5 humans walking out of the Hall of Voices as calmly as they had walked in. What the Concord archives did not have was any record of what humanity had been doing during those 600 silent years. No exploration maps, no trade routes, no military records, no diplomatic history with any other species, nothing at all. A species that left no records had chosen not to leave records. That thought had stayed with Quelven through the entire journey to Mnemes. He had sent a message ahead asking to speak with Ambassador Voss. She had replied in under an hour. The reply was one word: come. The landing pad was underground. His ship was guided in through a wide vertical shaft, cut straight down into the rock, lit along its walls by long strips of pale light. The walls were covered in writing, text carved directly into the stone in thin, careful lines, running from top to bottom without interruption. Ning Quelven tried to read some of it as the ship descended, but could not move fast enough through the words before the rock face changed. He did not have time to understand what he was reading, only to understand that someone had put a great deal of effort into making sure it would last. Serena Voss was waiting on the landing pad when he stepped out. She was alone. She looked exactly the same as she had in the Hall of Voices. Plain dark clothing, hands at her sides, face giving nothing away. "And you came faster than I expected," she said. "The Veth survey fleet left 4 days ago," said Quelven, "heading for the Vela Expanse." "I know." She turned and walked toward a corridor. "Come with me." Nemes was entirely underground. The surface was just rock and cold wind. Everything important was beneath it. The corridors went on for kilometers in every direction. Every wall held some form of record: carved text, sealed metal panels, rows of physical objects behind glass, with data containers stacked in careful order. The temperature was controlled precisely. Small sensors were fixed to the walls at regular intervals. The air had a dry, old smell to it, like stone and time. There were people everywhere, moving in quiet groups or alone, speaking in low voices, carrying things, working at stations built into the walls. Nobody looked up as Voss led Quelven through. Nobody hurried. Everything moved with the steady, an unhurried pace of people who had been doing the same work for a very long time, and expected to keep doing it. "How many people are here?" Quelven asked. "About 40,000, Voss said. "Researchers, archivists, support staff. They rotate every 2 years. Some of them choose to stay longer." "What do they archive?" "Everything," she said. She did not elaborate. She led him through a series of locked doors, each requiring a different key or scan, until they reached a section separated from the rest by a single plain door with no markings. She opened it with a small physical key on a chain around her wrist. The room on the other side was not large. It had one overhead light, 2 chairs, and a table. On the table was a display screen and a bound folder made of real paper. Voss sat down. Quelven sat across from her. "What I show you does not leave this room in any format you control," she said. "You can read it and ask questions." That is all." "Agreed," said Quelven. She opened the folder. What it contained was a formal record, written in dry and careful language, of events that had taken place 900 years ago. Quelven began reading. He read quickly, but he read everything. The first thing the record made clear was that humanity had reached space much earlier than anyone in the Concorde knew. Not years earlier, centuries earlier. While the Concorde was still filing its first probe reports about the quiet blue world in the outer galactic arm, humanity had already built faster-than-light ships and was moving carefully through space. They had no interest in being found yet. They watched other civilizations from a distance, mapped what they could, and kept themselves small and quiet. They were learning. During this period of early exploration, they found the Vela expanse. The first ships to enter the region reported nothing unusual. The second group reported faint repeating anomalies in their instruments. Something very large and very deep in the expanse was producing a weak signal. The third group went to find the source. They found the structure. The record described it in precise technical language. Mass 14 times that of Jupiter. Perfectly geometric. Cold on every sensor. Completely silent. The first probe sent inside lost contact immediately. And the second probe did the same. The survey team noted it as a high-priority target and called for more ships. Over the following 11 years, expedition after expedition traveled to the Vela expanse. Humans cut into the structure's outer shell. They mapped its interior corridors. They went deeper each time. They were careful, methodical, and confident that they were studying a dead relic of some long-gone civilization. And then one team did something the record listed only as an unauthorized activation attempt. Whatever it was, it worked. The structure woke up. Quelven turned the pages that followed slowly. 17 human ships were destroyed in the first 6 hours. 3 colonies within range of the expanse went completely silent. The entity that came to life, called only the sleeper in the record, used nothing that resembled a weapon. It reorganized matter. Ships, stations, equipment, and people simply stopped being what they were, broken down piece by piece with no force and no sound, as though being quietly disassembled by something very large and very patient. 400 million people died. The number sat on the page like a stone. It took 61 years of fighting, failing, learning, and suffering for humanity to understand the sleeper well enough to act. Every strategy was tried. Most failed. Each failure was documented in full, and from each failure came a small piece of understanding, earned at terrible cost. Eventually, after decades of work, researchers found a method, not a weapon, but a sequence, a specific arrangement of resonance pulses at exact intervals in exact positions that seemed to replicate the natural conditions under which the sleeper had first become dormant. When the sequence was used, the sleeper slowed, and then stopped, and then went silent again. It went back to sleep. Quelven set the last page down. The room was very still. "Why did no one know about any of this?" he asked. "Because we chose not to share it," Voss said. "We needed to understand the galaxy first. Who was careful and who was reckless? Who could be trusted and who could not? Who would listen?" She looked at him steadily across the table. "We spent 600 years watching before we came to that assembly." Quelven was quiet for a moment. He looked at the folder, then at the display, Anne then back at her. "You could have stopped the Veth directly," he said. "Used your ships, used what you know, gone to Vreth personally and shown him this record." Voss did not answer immediately. You could have done something more than a plaque, Quelven said. We tried, Voss said. Her voice did not change. It was not sad and it was not angry. It was simply a statement, flat and final, like the last sentence in a long record. She looked at the photograph of the plaque on the display screen. That was the try. Quelven looked at the photograph too. 3 sentences, 47 languages, placed in the center of the most powerful political chamber in the galaxy, and laughed at by everyone in the room. He thought about the storage corridor where a junior staff member had propped the plaque against a wall and walked away. He thought about the Veth fleet, already 11 days into its journey toward the Vela expanse, each with no idea what was waiting for them. He thought about what 400 million looked like as a number on a page. Is there anything that can stop what comes next? He asked. Voss folded her hands on the table. She looked at him with the expression of someone who had prepared for this exact conversation for a very long time. Yes, she said. She stood up. But first you need to understand something about humans. She moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at him. We do not prepare for things we think might happen. We prepare for things we know will happen. She opened the door. Come, there is more to show you. Quelven stood and followed her deeper into the archive, deeper into the rock, deeper into the long, patient history of a species that had been ready for this day for 900 years. The Veth fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel, and the structure was there immediately. Commander Adral Koss stood at the forward display of his bridge and said nothing for a long moment. He had seen a great many things in his career. He had fought 3 wars and led 2 annexation campaigns and stood on the surface of worlds no Veth soldier had ever walked before. He was not a person who was easily impressed, but the structure was impressive. Even at 3 light minutes distance, it filled a significant portion of the sensor display. Every instrument on every ship confirmed the same numbers. 14 times the mass of Jupiter. Perfectly geometric, cold, silent. No energy output, no radiation, no signals. Just dark, smooth geometry sitting in empty space, large enough to make 14 warships feel like specks of dust floating near a wall. It is dead, his science officer said. Whatever built this is long gone. No readings at all. Adral Koss looked at it a moment longer. Then he said, log the claim. Occurring holding back in a loose arc, feeding data, holding back in a loose arc, feeding data to the command vessel in real time. The point ship, the Veth Resolve, closed the distance to the structure and sent back a continuous stream of readings. The outer surface was flat and dark, made of a material that matched nothing in any Dominion database. No visible seams, no markings, no entry points. Just smooth, in a dark geometry that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Adral Koss ordered a cutting team to breach the outer shell. It took 4 hours. The material resisted every standard tool. They had to work through it slowly, using a high-energy sustained beam, cutting the same narrow line over and over until the surface finally gave way. When the breach opened, when about 3 meters wide, the sensors reported only dark, empty corridor on the other side. The air inside, when sampled, it was cold and very old and contained nothing unusual. A boarding team of 6 soldiers and 2 scientists went in. Adral Koss watched their helmet feeds from the bridge. The inside of the structure was a wide, perfectly straight corridor with the same smooth, dark walls as the exterior. The team moved forward slowly, taking readings, speaking in professional clip voices. 200 meters in, nothing had changed. The corridor continued ahead of them, without any visible end. And then one of the scientists said, the readings are changing. 12 seconds later, every feed went dark. Not damaged, not cut, simply dark. As though the feeds had never been running. No error message, no carrier signal. Nothing. Adral Koss tried to contact the boarding team directly. No response. He tried their suit systems. No signal, not even a basic status ping. He tried the Veth Resolve. The ship answered normally. But the team had simply become undetectable, not dead on any reading, not present on any reading, as though they had stepped sideways out of the physical world. Get the Resolve away from the structure, Adral Koss said. Now. The Veth Resolve fired its engines. It traveled approximately 400 meters. Then it stopped. The engines were still running. The crew was trying to accelerate. Every thruster reading showed output. But the ship sat completely still in space, as though something had reached out with an enormous, unhurried hand and simply held it in place. No force was detected. No beam or field showed on any instrument. The ship was just held. Adral Kos opened his mouth to give another order. He did not finish the sentence. The signal arrived. It did not come through any communication system. It did not travel through subspace. It passed through the hulls of every ship in the fleet, through every layer of shielding, through every personal device, through the air and the walls and the bodies of every crew member, and arrived not in the ears but directly in the mind. It was not a sound. It was not a voice. It was a pressure, something old and enormous and fully awake pressing itself against the inside of conscious thought. It lasted 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, Adral Kos experienced something he had no word for in any language he spoke. It was not fear, although it contained something fear was made from. It was the sensation of scale, of suddenly understanding, at a level deeper than thought, how very small the Veth Dominion was, how small all 17,000 warships were, how small all 30 occupied star systems were, how small the Galactic Concord with its 412 civilizations was. Not as a political statement, not as a threat, simply as a fact. The same fact you understand when you look up at a clear night sky and realize for just a moment what the distance between stars actually means. Something out there had just looked at them. Something that had existed longer than most stars currently burning in the galaxy. Something that did not care about them one way or the other, but was now awake. 3 seconds. Then it was gone. Then the Veth resolve began to come apart. It happened slowly and without any sound that the sensors could record. Panels separated from the hull frames. Frames separated from structural beams. The beams came apart into smaller sections. Each section continued to be broken down further, its matter gently and methodically reorganized, taken apart the way a person might quietly disassemble a small machine laid out on a table. The pieces drifted apart in the silence of space, calm and weightless, went and kept coming apart until they were too small to track. The crew of the Veth Resolve went the same way. Adral Kos watched it on the sensor display. He kept his hand steady. He had been trained not to panic. He was not panicking. He was simply watching something happen that his entire life of training and experience had given him no category for. He looked at his weapons officer. The weapons officer looked back at him. All systems, Adral Kos said. Every weapon on every ship in the fleet fired at once. The combined barrage was enormous. Enough concentrated energy to crack a small moon in half. It struck the structure across its entire forward face. Every shot hit. The sensors confirmed the impact on every round. There was no explosion. There was no damage reading, no flash, no heat signature, no structural change. The energy was absorbed so completely that the instruments could not confirm it had arrived. The structure looked exactly the same as it had before the barrage. Dark, smooth, cold, and still. For 40 seconds after the barrage ended, nothing happened. Then the structure moved. It turned first, a slow reorientation in space, massive and unhurried, the way a very large thing moves when it has all the time it needs. Then it began to travel. Every navigation system in the fleet identified the direction immediately, toward the galactic core, toward the inner systems, toward the crowded, populated center of the known galaxy where hundreds of civilizations had built their worlds and cities and histories. Adral Kos transmitted a full emergency distress signal to the Galactic Concord. It was the first time in his career that he had sent one. He did it without hesitation, without embarrassment, because there was no category for pride in what he had just watched happen to 14 of his crew members and one of his ships. Then he sat down and waited for replies, and they came quickly. Fleet pledges, offers of assistance, crisis protocols being activated across the Concord. He scanned the incoming messages as they stacked up on his display. He found the human response at the bottom of the list. It had arrived before most of the others. It said, "Stand by. Not help is coming. Not we are on our way. Just stand by." 2 words. As though whatever came next required waiting in a very specific and deliberate way, and the humans already knew exactly what that way was. Back in the Hall of Voices, the 3-second signal had hit the chamber at the same moment it hit the fleet. There was no warning. One moment the session was in progress. Delegates speaking, debating, going through the normal work of governance, and then it arrived in every mind simultaneously. Some species collapsed. Several had to be helped out of their seats. The Karathi Collective, beings who communicated almost entirely through sound, went completely silent, which was deeply wrong in a way that frightened everyone near them. The Yanari elder statesmen sat still and stared straight ahead at nothing, their ancient eyes unblinking. The human delegation sat still too. Their faces had gone pale, but none of them fell, and none of them made a sound. And when the 3 seconds ended, Serena Voss was already on her feet. She checked her communication device. A message had arrived on a private channel she had not shared with anyone in the Concorde. She checked the sender twice to be sure. It was from the personal account of High Chancellor Vreth. The message had no words. It contained a single character in Galactic Standard, the oldest and most formal symbol in the language, used in ancient diplomatic records to signal the complete surrender of a negotiating position. In its most precise and original translation, it meant, "I am listening." Voss read it once. She put the device in her pocket. She turned to her team and said quietly and without any expression on her face, "Tell the Admiral, it is time." Outside the Hall of Voices, in the storage corridor where a junior staff member had propped a scratched titanium plaque against the wall 3 weeks ago, the plaque sat in the half-dark. Nobody walked past it. The corridor was empty. The warning on it had not changed. It never needed to. The human fleet did not come from one place. It came from many. From quiet stations tucked inside asteroid fields, from deep space depots listed as inactive on Concorde navigation charts, from positions scattered across a wide stretch of space that nobody knew were occupied. The ships appeared one by one over 18 hours, each traveling to a pre-assigned coordinate without any signal, without any announcement, and without any of the ceremony that other civilizations used when deploying military power. When the last ship arrived and the fleet was fully assembled, it stretched across a volume of space large enough to swallow several solar systems whole. There were 411 ships. They were not beautiful. They did not look like the polished, matched fleets of the Veth Dominion or the clean geometric formations of the Yanari Defense Forces. Human ships were built in layers, repaired and modified and reinforced so many times over so many centuries that very few still resembled their original design. Some had extra plating welded across their hulls in wide, uneven strips. Some carried equipment mounted to their exteriors that no other species had ever seen before and could not identify by looking. All of them were scarred. All of them had the look of things that had been through something hard, more than once, and had been put back together each time by people who knew exactly what they were fixing and why. They had not been built for war in general. They had been built for this, for one specific enemy, one specific method, one specific plan. The Galactic Concorde offered their fleets within 6 hours of the distress signal from Commander Adral Kos. 7 major powers pledged warships. Era accepted all of it. She stated one accepted all of it. She stated one condition. She stated it once in a calm voice on an open channel where every fleet commander could hear it. Every ship follows our coordinates and our timing exactly. Nothing fires, nothing moves, and nothing transmits without authorization from our command. In the last time a species improvised against this entity without a full understanding of its behavior, they lost 400 million people. She paused for just a moment. We will not do that again. The channel was silent for a long time. Then the fleet commanders confirmed their agreement, one by one. The human command ship was called the Nemes Bell. It was not the largest ship in the fleet and not the most heavily armed, but it was the oldest. Over 300 years in continuous service, rebuilt and renamed several times, kept running through every refit by people who understood that what it carried mattered more than how it looked. What it carried was 900 years of research into the sleeper. Every behavioral record, every failed strategy, every partial success, and every observation ever made by researchers who had spent their entire careers trying to understand something that did not want to be understood. Admiral Heron Cole stood on the bridge. He was not young. His face was plain and quiet, the face of a person who had long ago run out of things to be surprised by. He had been selected for this specific command 11 years ago and had spent the time since doing one thing, preparing for this exact operation. He had read every file in the Nemus archive that related to the sleeper. He had run the simulation so many times that the numbers and sequences lived in him like a second memory. Quelven was also on the bridge. The humans had not invited him, but when he asked to come, they had not refused. He was given a spot near the back wall where he could observe without interfering, and he stood there quietly and watched everything. Cole ran his checks in steady, unhurried sequence. Platform positions, fleet formations, timing windows. The sleeper's current trajectory and speed, updated every few minutes from the sensor network. Its movement toward the galactic core had been steady since it left the Vela expanse. Not fast, but completely constant. Like something that had no reason to rush because it had nowhere to be and nothing to fear. The 6 platforms, Cole said to his operations officer. Status: all 6 in transit. Our arrival at assigned positions confirmed in 9 hours. Cole nodded. He looked at the main display. The 6 platforms were the center of everything. They were not weapons in the traditional sense. They were large, carefully constructed structures, each one different, each one built to perform a specific function at a specific moment in a specific sequence. What they produced was resonance, precisely shaped pulses at precise frequencies, and are designed after 9 centuries of research to recreate the exact conditions under which the sleeper had originally become dormant, not to damage it, not to destroy it, to speak to it in the only language humanity had ever found that it responded to. It had taken a very long time to learn that language. 400 million lives and 61 years the first time. Then 9 centuries of careful study after that, building on every painful lesson until the method was as precise and reliable as human researchers could make it. The operation had a name. It had always had a name. It sat in the Nemes archive, filed and documented and ready, long before anyone else in the galaxy knew it would be needed. The name was Operation We Told You. Nobody on the human side found the name amusing. It was not meant to be amusing. It was simply what the operation had always been called, because that was what it was. And on the second day of transit, Kelvin moved from his spot near the back wall and approached Cole carefully. He had been watching the Admiral for hours and had held his question back as long as he could manage. "Are you angry?" he asked. Cole glanced at him. "At who?" "At the Veth, at the Concord, at all of us." Quelven paused. "For not listening." Cole turned the question over visibly, in the way of a person giving it genuine thought rather than reaching for an easy answer. He looked at the display for a moment. Then he said, "We were angry once, a long time ago. Then we got busy." He said it simply, without heaviness, the way a person states something that stopped needing explanation many years ago. Quelven did not ask anything else. He went back to his spot near the wall. On the 3rd day, the sleeper paused. It had not paused before. For 62 hours, its movement had been steady and constant. Now, it positioned for 11 minutes. Then it positioned for 11 minutes. Then it turned. Not toward the galactic core, not in any direction that made tactical sense. It turned to face the human fleet directly. A slow, deliberate reorientation that took its time, as though whatever was making the decision had no concern for how long it took. The signal came again, shorter than the one at the Vela expanse, 1 second instead of 3, but focused, not broadcasting in all directions, pressing outward at every mind within range. This was directed. It arrived specifically in the minds of the people aboard the ships closest to the sleeper's facing side, and it carried something the first signal had not carried. Recognition, not of individuals, not of names or faces or histories. The recognition of a pattern, the same way a person might recognize a smell or a shape from a very old memory. Something in the human fleet, or in the arrangement of it, or in some quality that no instrument could measure, had registered to the sleeper as something it had encountered before. Cole stood at his station and felt it pass through him. He had read descriptions of this in the archive, survivor accounts from the original event, 900 years ago, were describing a similar moment near the end of the 61-year conflict. Researchers had theorized about what it meant. Nobody had ever been certain. He checked the platform positions on the display. "Report," he said. "All 6 platforms at assigned positions," his operations officer said. "Ready on your mark." "All Concorde ships holding formation?" "Confirmed. No independent movement." Cole looked at the sleeper's position marker on the display. It had not moved since it turned to face them. It was still, patient, present. He thought about the plaque sitting in a corridor wall of the Hall of Voices, propped against the stone in the half-dark. He thought about Serena Voss standing alone in the center of the assembly chamber, waiting for the laughter to stop. He thought about the pages in the Mnemis archive, the dry, careful record of 400 million people and 61 years and everything learned from both. He thought about the word that High Chancellor Vreth had sent to Voss in a single character on a private channel. "I am listening." Good, Cole thought, but not to me. "All ships hold pattern," he said. "Platforms begin final charge sequence." Across the fleet, 411 human ships went completely silent. No transmissions, no active sensors, no energy signatures beyond minimum life support. 3,000 Concorde vessels did the same, following the order without question. When the combined fleet, the largest military gathering in recorded history, sat in space and made itself as quiet as it possibly could. The 6 platforms charged in silence. The sleeper sat in the center of it all and waited, if something that had existed longer than most stars could be said to wait, while the species it had last encountered 9 centuries ago made their preparations on all sides of it. Cole put his hands behind his back and watched the charge indicators climb slowly toward ready. 900 years, he thought. 900 years of work, all of it leading to the next few minutes. He had no speeches prepared. He had no words for this moment. He simply stood at his station in the quiet of the bridge and waited for the indicators to reach the top. They were almost there. The charge indicators reached the top. Admiral Cole looked at them for one moment. Then he said, "Mark, Platform 1 fired." There was no beam of light, no visible flash, no explosion. What it produced was a pulse, a resonance wave moving outward at a specific frequency, shaped and aimed at the sleeper's outer shell with the precision of something that had been calculated and recalculated for 900 years. The instruments recorded contact. Nothing visible happened. The sleeper did not move. 31 seconds passed. Platform 2 fired. Then, after another measured interval, Platform 3, then 4, then 5. The gaps between each pulse were not equal and not random. They followed a pattern drawn from the behavioral data of the original event, a rhythm that was not mechanical and not musical, but something between the two, something closer to the timing of a living process, as though whoever built the sleeper, long ago and beyond the reach of any record, had used something biological as a template for its cycle of sleep. In between the 4th and 5th pulse, the sleeper moved, not toward the fleet, not toward anything. It moved inward, a slow contraction, its outer mass pulling toward its center, as though something deep inside was drawing it together. Sensors across the fleet reported a sharp drop in the sleeper's energy output, then an increase, then a rapid fluctuation that lasted 8 seconds and sent every sensitive instrument in every ship returning unreadable data. During those 8 seconds, 3 human ships were hit, not by any directed attack. The sleeper did not aim at them. What happened was a side effect, a wave of restructuring energy produced by the contraction, spreading outward without intent, and the 3 ships closest to that side of the formation were simply in the way. The Cadence, the Long Watch, and a support vessel called Arlen's Bridge were partially unmade in the same quiet and methodical way the Veth Resolve had been unmade. Not completely. The wave was not strong enough for that, but sections of each ship were gone when the 8 seconds ended. Their remaining pieces drifted in slow silence. The crews of all 3 ships had known this was possible before the operation began. Every crew member on every human ship near the platform positions had been told the risk directly and given the option to transfer to a safer assignment. Cole had insisted on that. He had read the accounts of the first encounter, people making decisions without information, dying without understanding what they were dying for, and he had decided that no one under his command would face this without a full choice. None of them had transferred. Platform 6 fired. The final pulse was different from the others. It was not a single wave but a sustained tone, held at a precise frequency for exactly 40 seconds, on a neither shortening nor lengthening regardless of what the sleeper did during it. This was the part the archive researchers had argued about longest. The duration had been revised 43 times over 2 centuries before the final figure was settled. Too short, and the process would not complete. Too long, and the sleeper might interpret it differently. 40 seconds. During the first 20, the sleeper's energy readings climbed sharply. Several Concord science officers transmitted urgent warnings about the risk of a full energy release, a discharge that their models suggested could destroy everything within a wide radius. Cole received every warning and acknowledged none of them. He had read the same models. He had also read the counter-research that his own team had developed over decades, which argued that the discharge risk peaked at the 18-second mark and then fell rapidly if the tone was maintained. Stopping at that point would be the most dangerous thing they could do. He watched the readings climb. He watched them peak. He said nothing. They fell, steadily, measurably, falling in the exact curve that the archive model had predicted. The pressure that had been sitting against the minds of every being in the fleet, that low, heavy presence that had been constant since the sleeper turned to face them, decreased in a way that felt almost physical, like something lifting away from behind the eyes. Crew members who had been gripping their stations without realizing it slowly loosened their hands. Emergency lighting on several Concord ships shifted back to normal without anyone touching the controls. The sleeper's movement stopped. All movement stopped. Its energy output fell below the minimum detectable level. Then it was silent. Not the silence of something pausing. Not the silence of something waiting for a better moment. The silence of something that was no longer present in any way that mattered. There only as mass, as geometry, as a cold structure in empty space, with nothing inside it that was paying attention to anything at all. 11 minutes and 43 seconds from the first pulse to the last. Cole stood at his station and let out a long, slow breath. He did not raise his fist. He did not cheer. None of his bridge crew cheered. They ran confirmation checks, cycling through every instrument on every platform, cross-referencing readings across the full fleet sensor network, running the verification sequence that the archive required before any official declaration could be made. This process took 20 minutes. Cole waited through all of it without speaking. Then his communications officer said, "All Concord channels open, Admiral. Confirmation verified across all platforms." "Tell them," Cole said, when the confirmation transmitted across the network. In the Hall of Voices, where a full emergency session had been running without break for 11 days, the message arrived in the middle of a debate about evacuation routes for the inner systems. The delegate who received it read it twice before standing up without asking for the floor and saying, loudly and clearly, that it was over. The hall was quiet for a moment. Then a sound rose. Not organized, not quite a cheer, but a release. We're pouring out of 412 species simultaneously, the sound of something being let go that had been held very tightly for a very long time. On the Mnemi's bell, Quelven stood near the back of the bridge and watched Cole shake hands with his operations team quietly and without ceremony. He had been trying for several minutes to find the right words for what he had just seen and kept coming back empty. The operation itself was extraordinary. The platforms, the sequence, sure, the timing, all of it flawless. But what Quelven could not stop thinking about was something much older and much simpler. A woman standing alone in the center of the Hall of Voices, a scratch plaque on a podium, 3 sentences, and the laughter that had filled that enormous chamber from wall to wall and floor to ceiling while she stood and waited for it to stop. She had known then. Every human in that room had known. Everything that had just happened in 11 minutes and 43 seconds had been prepared for, named, documented, and filed long before anyone else in the galaxy knew the preparation was needed. They had watched from a distance as the Veth fleet announced its plans to explore the Vela expanse. They had watched the announcement be celebrated, and they had placed a plaque on a podium and waited to see if anyone would read it. Nobody had, except one. Kelvin looked at his recording device. He had been taking notes since the moment he first walked into the Hall of Voices and saw the plaque being laughed at. He had enough material, he realized, for a very important book. The Galactic Concord convened its formal emergency session 2 weeks later, once the fleet had confirmed the sleeper's dormancy and begun the long return. The Hall of Voices was full, every seat occupied, every delegation present, no empty chairs. When the human delegation entered, the chamber was already completely quiet. It stayed quiet. High Chancellor Vreth rose from his seat when Serena Voss crossed the threshold, a gesture of formal respect that his species had not extended to another civilization in living memory. He did not speak. He simply stood and remained standing until she reached the center podium. She set something on the podium, a new plaque, cleaner than the first, but made from the same dark metal and engraved with the same depth and care, the same 47 languages. "There are 2 more entities like this one," she said. Her voice was calm and even, the same voice she had used the first time she stood here, back when the chamber was full of laughter. Different locations, different behavior, different methods required to address them if they are ever disturbed. She paused. "We have complete records on both. If we would like to share them with the Concord." She let that sit in the air for a moment. "We believe the galaxy has earned that." No one laughed. 3 years later, Quelven published his account of the Vela incident. It was 900 pages long and was translated into 216 languages within its first year in circulation. It documented everything: the plaque, the laughter, the Minimus archive, the fleet, the platforms. Were in the 11 minutes and 43 seconds that changed how the galaxy understood the species it had dismissed as primitive newcomers with a piece of old metal and 3 sentences to offer. The last line of the book read, "Humanity did not resent the laughter. They had planned for it." What surprised them most in the years that followed was how quickly the rest of the galaxy learned to be quiet and listen. The original plaque was removed from the storage corridor where it had spent 3 weeks propped against a wall in the half-dark. It was cleaned, carefully mounted in a proper frame, and installed above the main entrance to the Hall of Voices, directly over the threshold, under a single dedicated light that never went off. Every delegate from every species passed beneath it to enter the chamber. Nobody had to be told not to laugh at it. They already knew.